Welcome to another Tempo Storm Standard Meta Snapshot. The Hearthstone meta has once again seen developments following the latest mini-set and the last Grandmasters tour. The vast majority of pro players have been very vocal that, despite Kazakusan being slightly overtuned, the meta itself is still great. Of course, if you're still looking for something different, the new expansion should be out in April, but that won't stop us from looking at the ranked ladder now. Leading off Tier 1 in this meta snapshot is Beast Druid. This deck is no stranger to the high ranks of Legend, and all things being equal, will continue to take over the meta as it evolves. The build for this deck remains the same, continuing to play cheap beasts alongside Oracle of Elune and spells such as Moonlight Guidance, Composting, and Nature Studies to make Umbral Owl cheaper. Once you've taken board, it's hard to lose it, and you can usually close out the game with Arbor up. Beast Druid has a good matchup spread, with its best ones coming from aggressive decks that can't really keep up with the board pressure, such as Face Hunter or Shadow Priest. On the flip side, the decks tend to have difficulty when facing off against more control-focused archetypes like Control Warrior. The next deck finding its way into Tier 1 is, once again, Burn Shaman. This archetype remains one of the best aggressive ladder decks, despite its mid-game shell. Even decks such as Face Hunter have adapted to the times and now run a higher curve than they used to, and Burn Shaman is no exception. This archetype aims to spend the early turns cycling and chipping away at their opponent's health, and then aims to close out the game with either a large Snowfall Guardian or burn damage and spell power. Burn Shaman is a deck practically built to abuse some of the top meta decks, and thus is one of the best matchups against Beast Druid. When they build a board, your spells can clear it, and once you make it to Snowfall Guardian, the game usually wraps itself up. As for bad matchups, as one might expect, any deck with armor gain tends to be problematic for you. This makes Control Warrior one of the worst matchups for you, leaving you with a lack of win condition more often than not. The last deck we're looking at in Tier 1 this time is another familiar face from the last meta snapshot. Kazakusan Druid makes yet another appearance. Despite the minor nerf to this archetype's name card, the deck still remains a serious threat on ladder. Druid continues to use Overgrowth and Guff to abuse the power of Kazakusan and uses it to aggressively favorably swing games. Thanks to cards such as Capture Coldtooth Mine, you'll be practically guaranteed to see the dragon every game, making it rough out here for ladder grinders. This archetype has a very strong set of matchups for ladder, but it shines particularly bright in a few. Control Warrior comes to mind, as the deck is greedy and lacks a concise way to deal with the value from Kazakusan. But this deck has a rough time against hyper-aggressive decks that take advantage of your ramp turns, making Shadow Priest and Aggro Druid both very daunting to face. That covers the top decks within the first tier. As usual, we're going to briefly take a look at the second tier to give you a more in-depth view of the meta, but before we do so, we want to ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be kept up to date with all of our Hearthstone content. Now let's take a look at the decks leading Tier 2. The first deck making an appearance here is Shadow Priest. This archetype previously found itself in the upper tier, but fell due to its matchups in the meta. While the deck is very good, it's missing a bit of the oomph that separates the top two tiers. Although if you're looking for very fast games, we strongly suggest this deck. Its best matchup is against greedy decks like Kazakusan Druid, and much like some of the Tier 1 decks, it has a very bad time facing off against Control Warrior's massive amount of healing. The second deck you'll find in Tier 2 is Fell Demon Hunter. This combo-based archetype continues to play like it always has, cycling aggressively and then closing out the game using either Jace Darkweaver to recast your powerful spells, or Kurtrus, Expendable Performers, and Fellfire Dreadeye to OTK your opponents. Both of these win conditions have their place in different matchups, making the deck extremely versatile. Fell Demon Hunter is a deck that preys on aggressive decks that struggle with their opponent's heals, meaning that it absolutely demolishes both Face Hunter and Aggro Druid. On the flip side, decks with consistent pressure that don't really struggle with removal, such as Quest Rogue and Libram Paladin, tend to make a mockery of Demon Hunter. The last deck we're looking at today in Tier 2 is Quest Hunter. Many players are fond of this archetype. They spend the early game finishing the quest, then use the questline reward, 2 damage for every spell you play, to kill their opponent. Thanks to this wide amount of burst, Quest Hunter loves queuing into decks such as Owl Warlock or even Burn Shaman, as they have little way to stop your game plan. As for bad matchups, Quest Hunter continues to struggle with Poison Rogue, as their lack of minions makes it harder for you to finish your quest, and even if you do, you will probably just die to Shank. Thank you for joining us for another Meta Snapshot. We here at Tempo Storm are having an absolute blast with the meta currently, but we're still extremely excited to see what the new expansion and rotation have in store. If you enjoyed our look into the meta, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be kept up to date with all of our card game content. Until next time.